Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. February 22nd, 2024. Athens, Georgia. At 9:11 a.m., a 911 call came through Clark County Emergency Services. No voice, no ID, just ambient noise. Barely audible movement, possibly from a pocket or hand brushing a phone screen. Then silence. Dispatch logged the call as open line, unresolved. No follow-up was made, no units dispatched. Nothing indicated it was anything more than a pocket dial. 3 hours later, the body of Laken Hope Riley, age 22, was found face down in a wooded patch beside Herrick Lake. She was wearing athletic leggings, a light running jacket, and one shoe. Her smartwatch had stopped recording vitals at 9:13. Her phone, shattered and mud-streaked, was found nearby. Screen down, SIM card intact. There were no signs of sexual assault, no weapons visible, no eyewitnesses. She had gone out for a run. That was her routine. Every morning, same trail, same route, the same portion of forest behind the University of Georgia campus, where hundreds of students jog, walk, or bike each week. She left her off-campus housing at 8:43 a.m. Surveillance from a neighbor's Ring camera captured her locking the front door, earbuds in, ponytail pulled through a white UGA cap. She texted her mom at 8:55 a.m. Running the trail today. No rain, no excuses. That message would be the last anyone received from her. Her roommate, unable to reach her by noon, submitted a missing person alert through campus security. Local PD was contacted at 12:22 p.m. The body was discovered at 12:38 by an officer performing a grid search near the southern trailhead. Laken was lying in a prone position, body partially obscured by leaves. Her right foot was bare, the other still in a black Asics sneaker. Her watch was still strapped to her wrist. Her head showed blunt force trauma. Her hands had no visible cuts, no bruises on the knuckles, no signs of active defense. The response was quick. Scene sealed by 1 RPM. University police called in for support. Clark County Coroner's Office notified and deployed. By 2:15 p.m., forensic techs began processing the perimeter. Lead crime scene technician Joshua Cleary noted that for a presumed assault site, the scene was abnormally contained. Tight radius, low blood visibility, no drag marks. One footprint left of the path. Size and pattern unclear due to leaf litter. At 3:30 p.m., the phone and smartwatch were secured for data extraction. Both were damaged but salvageable. The tech team flagged an anomaly in the watch's data. At 9:12, it registered a sudden shift in elevation and heart rate spike, followed immediately by a signal drop. No recorded fall. The drop wasn't consistent with tripping. There was no body position log typical of an accidental impact. It looked like she'd been lifted off the ground, then dropped. Hard. Detective Chris Nichols reviewed the 911 call that evening. His notes read, ambient contact, shuffle, movement, light exhale, nothing verbal, disconnect. It lasted exactly 7 seconds. It never escalated to a scream. He wrote one more line. She tried to make the call. She didn't panic. She didn't beg. She just knew. The official designation, homicide, came at 5:45 p.m. The announcement from the mayor's office used more careful phrasing, suspicious death under active investigation. But by the time the sun set, word had already spread across campus. Someone killed her. The memorial started within hours. Flowers, signs, chalk messages at the trailhead. Sorority sisters wore black to their evening chapter meeting. Her professors canceled class. The university president issued a video statement before 9 p.m. We lost one of our own today. By then, the full forensic breakdown was underway. Samples were taken from Laken's fingernails, jacket fibers, and the base of her running shoes. Technicians collected soil samples around the immediate radius. A nearby public trash can was searched, producing nothing of relevance. 2 torn receipts and an old protein bar wrapper, neither linked to her. Clark County PD filed 3 digital subpoenas within 24 hours. One to her mobile carrier for tower triangulation, one to her fitness app to extract the last minute of movement data, and one to Google to pull geolocation history from the device if enabled. The trail camera on the north side of Herrick Lake was found non-functional. University maintenance records showed it had been flagged as offline since early January. No repair requested, no footage available. There were no other operational cameras in that portion of the woods. Nichols requested aerial mapping of the area for foliage disruption patterns. Drones began scanning the tree line for evidence of alternate access points. There were none. Whoever attacked her did so on foot. Whoever did this knew she'd be there. Or they waited for someone like her. By end of day, no suspects were named, no persons of interest identified. No known enemies, stalkers, or domestic concerns emerged from her background check. Her roommate gave a full statement. No conflict, no drama, no recent issues. She described Lakin as structured, kind, predictable. She didn't date much. She didn't party. She studied. She ran. She helped first-year students feel less alone. Nichols didn't trust clean stories. Too normal, he muttered to his partner that night. That's what scares me. She did everything right, and she still ended up dead. The initial crime scene had delivered just enough to confirm that something violent, rapid, and deeply calculated had happened. But no fingerprints, no weapon, no witnesses, and no suspect. What they had next was data. By the morning of February 23, 2024, a digital forensic unit began recovering metadata from the smartwatch and cell phone recovered beside the victim. Both devices were physically damaged, but internal memory remained intact. The Apple Watch held GPS logs, heart rate data, and activity tracking down to the second. The iPhone SE provided call history, message threads, app activity, and cached geolocation entries via Apple Health and Google Location Timeline. Between 8:55 and 9:12 a.m., Lakin Riley followed the same route she used nearly every weekday. Her health app logged consistent running pace, averaged 7:58 minutes per mile, until 9:11:42 a.m. At that timestamp, the device recorded a sharp spike in heart rate, followed by sudden deceleration. Steps stopped. Acceleration sensors showed one violent jolt, interpreted later by FBI techs as vertical displacement. That aligned with a blunt trauma strike or forceful lift. Most notably, during this same time frame, her phone initiated an emergency call to 911. She had not dialed manually. The sequence matched a rapid press alert, side button pressed 5 times in under 5 seconds. The phone's haptic sensor confirmed it. It wasn't an accident. This wasn't a panic scream or open line dial. It was a protocol, silent, swift, intentional. Detective Chris Nichols and digital analyst Kimberly Soto compiled a digital movement overlay. From 8:43 to 9:10 a.m., Lakin had moved northeast through the Oconee Forest Park Trail in a straight line. The disruption came as she rounded a blind turn, 130 yards from the end of the trail, where it narrows between trees. That stretch had no security cameras, no clear sight lines from nearby buildings. It was a dead zone, both literally and logistically. The phone's data connection dropped entirely at 9:13:04 a.m., 2 minutes of missing time. Nichols flagged it. Why does the signal die after the event? It should have failed before the call, not after. Digital forensics cross-checked tower logs from Verizon. The nearest tower showed latency variance consistent with brief physical obstruction, meaning the phone may have been moved beneath dense foliage or into a shielded space. That single gap became a red flag. Someone had intentionally or unintentionally interfered with the signal. In parallel, investigators began the victimology phase. Lakin Hope Riley, 22, white female, nursing student at Augusta University Satellite Campus in Athens. Former University of Georgia student, class of 2023, transferred after sophomore year to pursue specialized clinical work. No disciplinary records, no substance history, no romantic entanglements on record. 0 known online threats, social profile, clean, Instagram inactive since January. Last DM was to her mother about returning home for spring break. Her iCloud photo library showed no recent screenshots, saved messages, or tracking apps. No notes app entries. No digital indications of fear, tension, or conflict. Nichols reviewed her Google Maps location history across the past 30 days. Her route to Herrick Lake was used 10 times. Same time window, same entry and exit points. The path was habitual, Predictable. That made her vulnerable. A sweep of her Venmo and banking records showed no unusual transactions, no subscriptions, no rideshare activity. She walked to the trailhead. Nothing in her digital trail suggested luring, baiting, or planned contact. Behavioral analysts from GBI Behavioral Threat Assessment Unit ran her online presence through digital threat detection software. No red flags, no matching keywords, no encrypted app usage. The FBI profiler attached to the case, SSA Valerie Quinn, delivered a short report. Victim displays patterns consistent with low-risk profile. Crime appears to be blitz-style and opportunistic. No preparatory behavior by victim. No indication of targeted interaction within 14 days prior. That was the problem. No motive, no lead. So the focus turned to the terrain. Who had access to the area? Who moved through that section unnoticed? And was there any device, phone, tablet, vehicle that pinged in the vicinity during that same 9-minute window? A geofence warrant was drafted and submitted by 4 p.m. on February 23rd. The coordinates extended in a 300-meter radius from where Riley's watch stopped transmitting. Google confirmed it would begin processing anonymized device IDs within 72 hours. As investigators waited, local officers began knocking doors near the southeast edge of the park. One complex stood out, Vine Street Apartments, approximately 1.2 miles from the trail, separated by a narrow tree line and undeveloped drainage corridor. The building had one working camera angled toward the dumpster. It was there across 48 hours later that the next break would occur. But in this chapter of the investigation, everything hinged on cold data. Zero emotion, zero interpretation, just raw movement, broken seconds, and a signal that died too late. Nichols stood over the screen at 7:00 p.m., staring at the overlapping timestamps. The watch stopped. The phone died. But she still tried to get help, he said. She knew. He didn't say it out loud, but the implication was obvious. Whoever did this was watching, waiting, timing it, and they picked that blind curve for a reason. The first solid lead didn't come from a surveillance camera or cell tower triangulation. It came from a garbage bin. February 24th, 2024. Just before 8 a.m., a sanitation worker assigned to Vine Street Apartments flagged a report to property management. A foul-smelling bag had been improperly discarded, torn open, soaked, left outside the can. The building's maintenance supervisor checked it before disposal. Inside were sweatpants, a hooded jacket, and one pair of sneakers. All damp, one sleeve matted with what appeared to be dried blood. The shoes carried flecks of reddish-brown grime along the soles. It didn't belong to anyone in the immediate units. Athens Clark County PD arrived within the hour. The clothing was collected under sealed evidence protocols and logged for immediate forensic analysis. The fibers on the jacket's interior collar were tested for biological matter. Initial swabs returned presumptive positive for blood. DNA analysis was expedited through GBI's regional lab in Decatur. On February 26th, the results confirmed the sample contained mitochondrial DNA consistent with Lake and Riley. That development shifted the case from a digital black hole to a physical anchor. Investigators began canvassing the Vine Street complex, a mid-sized older apartment building located roughly a mile southeast of the trail where Lacken's body had been found. The backside of the complex shared an undeveloped wooded buffer with Oconee Forest Park. The walking distance between the trail and the building's rear edge was under 10 minutes through unpaved terrain. Detective Chris Nichols directed a secondary ground sweep behind the complex. The GBI brought in cadaver dogs and heat mapping drones. In the tree line approximately 400 yards from the apartments, officers found traces of disrupted foliage, a slight depression in the brush, fresh footprints, and pieces of plastic wrapper. There was no indication the spot had been used for any legitimate recreation. No litter pattern, no signs of loitering, but the depression was fresh, less than 72 hours old. The path, while not an official trail, connected two critical points: the approximate last GPS ping from Lacken's device and the dumpsters of Vine Street Apartments. Nichols later wrote in his case notes, "No blood at the scene, no weapon, no forced access. But someone tried to erase part of their presence here and didn't finish the job." Crime scene techs photographed every corner of the dumpster area. The camera from the property's exterior, only one facing the bins, was reviewed. It captured motion at 3:47 a.m. on February 23rd. The footage showed a single subject, medium build, wearing a hoodie, carrying a tied plastic bag. The person entered from the rear lot, opened the bin lid, discarded the bag, and walked away. The face was not visible, but what stood out, the individual wasn't wearing shoes. That detail flagged attention immediately. Forensic footwear analysts later confirmed that one of the prints found in the wooded depression behind the apartments matched the outsole pattern of the discarded sneakers. Dirt and leaf fragments embedded in the shoe treads matched the topsoil from the tree line. And yet, despite this connection, no one had reported suspicious activity. No neighbor complaints, no noise calls, no alarms triggered. Whoever discarded the clothing did it fast, quietly, and at an hour when few residents were awake. Detectives pulled utility logs from the building. No power outages, no door access codes triggered on external doors between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. However, Vine Street was not a secured access property. Anyone could come and go through the rear of the complex, particularly on foot. Investigators began compiling a tenant list. Residents were cross-checked against parole records, campus registries, ICE detainers, and local booking history. Interviews began quietly, door to door, unannounced, each conducted by plainclothes detectives. The objective was clear: establish who lived in which unit, who was accounted for during the night of February 22nd, and whether any residents noticed missing clothes, changed behavior, or uncollected deliveries. No one confessed to recognizing the clothing. No one reported seeing someone barefoot at dawn. Still, one tenant, Unit 3C, stated during a voluntary interview that they remembered seeing a guy out back around Valentine's just sort of wandering. The tenant thought the person wasn't a resident. He didn't look like he lived here, kept looking around like he was waiting for something. The individual couldn't recall specific features, just that he had shaggy hair and kept his head down. At this stage, it still wasn't enough for an arrest, but Nichols marked the footage and the blood-stained clothing as critical pivot points. They had time, they had location. Now they had evidence physically linking an unknown subject to the victim. Lab analysts began testing additional material recovered from the jacket interior. 2 stray hairs. One was blonde, likely Lockens. The second was darker, longer, coarser. A DNA profile was extracted, but no match returned in CODIS. Not yet, but every sample collected moved the case forward. There's a tendency in major cases to wait for the big break, but more often it's the layering of small details that constructs a complete story. A blood flake on a sleeve, a shoe print no one bothered to wipe, an unscheduled movement at 3:47 a.m. These aren't dramatic in isolation, but when they connect, when they point in the same direction, they stop being random. They start to matter. By February 27th, the case file had outgrown its original binder. Every new development brought another page, another layer. But it was the results from the lab in Decatur that marked a real shift. The DNA recovered from the inner collar of the jacket found behind Vine Street matched mitochondrial markers from Lack and Riley, as already confirmed. But deeper inside the jacket, forensic techs had lifted a second profile from a coarse strand of dark hair. It was male, not in CODIS. No criminal history, at least not one tied to a state or federal conviction. Without a name, investigators moved to trace identity through exclusion. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation issued requests to ICE, Department of Corrections, and parole databases. The goal was to cross-reference anyone with a known presence in the Athens area, particularly those with gaps in documentation, unverified addresses, or recent releases without full biometrics entered. A hit came in within 24 hours, not from DNA, but from a prior booking photo and incomplete biometric set linked to a 2023 arrest in New York. The individual had been cited for endangering the welfare of a child. He was detained, fingerprinted, and released before ICE was able to issue a detainer. That man's fingerprints were recently uploaded into a regional system in Georgia after a separate minor arrest, shoplifting. The prints were now matched to Jose Antonio Ibarra, 26, Venezuelan national, undocumented, known to reside in Athens in early 2024. Not previously flagged as a suspect. His name had not appeared on any University of Georgia or Augusta University systems. No formal employment history, a loose connection to the Vine Street apartments. His brother was listed as a leaseholder on Unit 5B. At this point, Ibarra was still not charged. The data only placed him in proximity. No footage showed his face. No one had yet testified to seeing him with the victim. But something caught the lead investigator's attention. A pair of old police body cam videos from the New York incident had captured Ibarra's voice. Analysts ran a voice sample comparison to the ambient sound on the original 911 call made from Lakin's phone. It wasn't a match, but it ruled nothing out either. There was simply no male voice at all on the emergency call. Just the sound of air and subtle movement. Possibly a sleeve. Possibly wind. Possibly someone watching her collapse. Investigators returned to the terrain. They traced the footpath again between the Vine Street apartments and the wooded site near the lake. This time, a drone with thermal overlay identified a plastic bag deep in the brush. Inside, one sock, a torn piece of athletic tape, and a broken USB drive. No blood, no DNA, but the tape contained embedded hair fragments, later determined to match the same unidentified male profile. Forensics logged it as secondary trace 003B. Still no match in national systems. The broken USB couldn't be decrypted. It was too damaged, its PCB partially burned. No files recovered, but the evidence wasn't just physical, it was absence. No digital footprint for Ibarra, no GPS data, no financial record, no Wi-Fi logs, no vehicle registered, nothing in his name anywhere. That too was a data point. For law enforcement, the question became procedural. How does someone move freely through 4 different jurisdictions over 3 years with at least 2 arrests and still remain invisible? Internally, investigators began to refer to this as the system gap, a failure not of one agency, but of the coordination between them. A man without papers, without ID, without a flag on his name, had become invisible to the databases meant to prevent exactly this. And now, Lakin Riley was dead. The case was no longer just about evidence. It was about oversight. By the first week of March 2024, the case against Jose Antonio Ibarra was building. But it wasn't solid. It had weight, yes. It had pressure. But it didn't yet have legal shape. Investigators had forensic connections. Blood on discarded clothing, a hair fragment inside the jacket, a location pattern, and a geofence radius that placed him in the zone. But they didn't have a timeline that proved direct contact, and they didn't have a confession. In true crime cases, the space between suspicion and charge is often defined not by lack of evidence, but by the kind of evidence. Law enforcement needed probable cause, not theory, not context, something that would hold in court. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation moved forward with what it had. Ibarra was brought in under a material witness order tied to the Feb 22 homicide, not yet as a charged suspect. His rights were read. No lawyer was present. He answered few questions. His behavior was flat, his affect low. When asked about his whereabouts that morning, he gave vague references, said he went for a walk, maybe near the trees, couldn't name the street, didn't know the victim, claimed he had never been to the lake. They didn't show him the clothing photos. They didn't bring up the DNA. Not yet. Meanwhile, back in Athens, another layer of evidence was developing. Tech analysts had begun scraping network logs from local Wi-Fi routers near Vine Street. While Ibarra had no registered phone account, analysts found that one device, a generic Android with no SIM card, had connected briefly to an unsecured network at 3:53 a.m. on February 23rd. The MAC address wasn't tied to any known device in the building's leaseholder profiles. The signal dropped within 20 seconds. Digital signature analysis suggested the device had been used before in downtown Athens, once on January 17th near a laundromat, another time on February 4th within range of UGA's North Campus. It wasn't hard proof, but it established movement, and it confirmed the presence of a rogue device near the same dumpster where Lakin's blood-stained clothing had been found. A second round of door-to-door interviews was launched. A maintenance worker recalled a man with a gray hoodie frequenting the utility room 2 weeks prior, saying he was just warming up. That description loosely matched Ibarra, but it wasn't enough to make an ID. and no camera inside the utility room was active. Back in the interrogation room, Nichols sat outside the glass reviewing the notes. Ibarra hadn't asked for food, barely moved, said nothing that could be tested for deception. That silence, the absence of resistance, sometimes made cases harder. There's no contradiction to exploit, no lie to trap, just a flat wall. They had a hair, a location, a digital ghost, but no murder weapon, no visual proof, and no confession. Still, the pressure was escalating. Public outcry was growing. The name Laken Riley was now national. And in every conversation, one question kept surfacing. How did this happen in broad daylight, on a student trail, without warning, without defense? For Nichols, that wasn't just public sentiment. It was operational failure. A girl had followed every rule, routine, communication, safety awareness. Still, she disappeared in a pocket of the system. And for now, the man most closely tied to that disappearance remained just beyond the line of charge. That would change, but not yet. On March 5, 2024, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation received the final comparative analysis from the state crime lab. The results closed a critical gap. The soil embedded in the soles of the sneakers discarded behind Vine Street apartments, shoes believed to be worn during the homicide, contained a distinct compound match to a small patch of disturbed earth near Herrick Lake, within 10 feet of where Laken Riley's body had been found. Mineral composition, pH, moisture retention, and organic content all aligned. That confirmed movement between the trail and the dump site. Additionally, the lab completed touch DNA testing on the inner seam of Laken's windbreaker, recovered with her body. Partial male DNA was found. Low quantity but sufficient for comparison. It matched the unknown profile previously found in the jacket collar and on the athletic tape retrieved from the woods. While the DNA was not sufficient for CODIS upload due to chain breaks, it did match the reference sample obtained from Jose Antonio Ibarra during detainment. That development was critical. Prosecutors reviewed the combined material. A wearable item bearing Laken's blood, a personal item found discarded within walking distance of both crime scene and suspect's associated residence, trace DNA consistency, digital proximity within the time of death window, and no verifiable alibi. That afternoon, GBI and Clark County District Attorney's Office issued a warrant for Ibarra's arrest on felony murder charges. The warrant included secondary charges, aggravated battery, kidnapping with bodily harm, concealing a death, and obstruction of emergency communication. He was transferred from holding to Clark County Jail under a no-bond order. The arrest affidavit noted the time of death as approximately 9:13 a.m., February 22, 2024, based on smartwatch data cross-referenced with coroner estimates. Autopsy confirmed death by blunt force trauma to the skull with contributing asphyxiation. There were no signs of sexual assault. The coroner listed cause of death as homicide assaultive act. While investigators had not yet identified a weapon, autopsy findings indicated the fatal blow was delivered by a heavy object with no sharp edges, potentially a rock, blunt stick, or non-metal tool. No such item had been recovered. The case now had legal footing, and it had weight. Behind the scenes, preparation began for indictment. Prosecutors would need to convert a forensic sequence into a narrative, carefully aligned with admissible chain of custody. That meant holding back certain digital inferences, including the Android device signal, unless authenticated by third-party telecom analysis. Meanwhile, university officials released a joint statement acknowledging the continued gravity of this tragedy and the commitment to campus safety reforms. It was the first formal mention of institutional review. For Laken Riley's family, the moment was heavy but unfinished. There was no trial date, no resolution. Just the formal confirmation that the man tied to the items left in the woods, the man without documented ties, without a phone, without an alibi, was now facing formal charges. For the lead investigators, the challenge shifted. Not proving suspicion, but proving control, sequence, and premeditation without overstepping forensic clarity. The next move would not belong to them. It would belong to the courts. On March 8, 2024, the Clark County District Attorney presented the case to a grand jury. The hearing lasted less than 2 hours. The panel returned 10 indictments against Jose Antonio Ibarra, chief among them, malice murder and 3 counts of felony murder. Supporting charges included kidnapping with bodily injury, aggravated battery, concealing a death, and obstruction of a 911 call. The decision wasn't unexpected, but the pace of it and the legal clarity behind it signaled a shift. The evidence had crossed a threshold. No longer fragments, no longer probabilities. The case had coherence. A press conference was held the next morning. Prosecutors delivered a measured statement. The facts support prosecution. The law supports action. They didn't expand. They didn't answer questions about motive. No speculation, no drama, just a confirmation that the system was now moving forward. Behind the scenes, security at the courthouse was increased. Public attention had grown fast, fed by national outlets, political narratives, and online discourse. The case wasn't just a local murder anymore. It had become a referendum on policy, immigration enforcement, campus security, and systemic failure. Media focus shifted quickly to Ibarra's background. Headlines questioned how someone with previous arrests in multiple states had remained free. Others criticized the university's lack of functioning surveillance in the area Lacan was killed. There were calls for administrative resignations. Others pushed for state legislation to tighten oversight on undocumented offenders with prior charges. Inside the investigation unit, no one focused on headlines. They were building the prosecutorial timeline. The goal was to present a sequence that could stand on evidence alone. No emotional appeals, no room for loopholes. Each element was reviewed again. Location data, DNA profiles, soil comparison, time of death confirmation, lack of alibi, lack of digital footprint, and proximity between victim and suspect. Still, the biggest unknown remained. The weapon had not been found. But the team wasn't concerned about that. The medical examiner's report was clear. Cause of death was homicidal blunt force trauma. The absence of the weapon would not break the case as long as the narrative held. The trial date had not yet been set, but the charge was locked. For Lacan's family, this marked the first legal recognition that their daughter had not just been taken, but that someone would answer for it. For Athens, it marked something else. The realization that a crime like this doesn't just end in the woods. It radiates into law, into public policy, and into the lives of everyone left behind. On November 15, 2024, Jose Antonio Ibarra stood in Clark County Superior Court. He declined trial by jury. His public defender submitted a formal waiver. The case would be decided by Judge H. Patrick Haggard, bench trial only. The courtroom was quiet. No media cameras. Just transcripts, court officers, and the weight of forensic evidence reviewed line by line. Prosecutors presented what they had: the time-locked smartwatch data, the matching DNA from 3 independent items, the soil compound transfer, and the discarded clothing found less than a mile from where Lacan Riley had been killed. The absence of a weapon was noted, but not needed. The autopsy confirmed blunt force trauma with contributing asphyxiation, manner, homicide. There was no contradictory testimony, no cross-examination of key findings, no statements from Ibarra. He sat silent. On November 20th, Judge Haggard delivered the ruling: guilty on all counts: malice murder, felony murder, kidnapping with bodily harm, concealing the death, obstruction of emergency communication. The sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no visible reaction from Ibarra. No objection, no words. For the Riley family, justice had a form. Not healing, but structure. The process had done what it could. In January 2025, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Lacan-Riley Act, aimed at mandating federal detention of undocumented individuals charged with theft or burglary. It was a direct response to the failures exposed in this case, failures that had allowed Ibarra to remain free after prior arrests in other states. The University of Georgia upgraded surveillance systems around Oconee Forest Park. Motion-activated lighting was added. Student safety protocols were revised. Lacan's former classmates at Augusta University launched the Lacan Hope Foundation, offering scholarships to nursing students who demonstrated leadership in community health and violence prevention. Her story became part of training modules for campus safety officers across Georgia. In crimes like this, justice doesn't restore what was taken, but it creates a boundary between what happened and what happens next, between absence and accountability. And for those left behind, that boundary matters. As someone who's followed every detail of this case, I'm left with one truth. Justice alone can't bring peace, but it can set a boundary between chaos and order. Laken Riley didn't choose to be a symbol, but in her memory, we're reminded of how quickly life can change and how deeply our systems must be held accountable. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think we could do better as a society, as neighbors, or even just as individuals walking the same paths? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from or what you took away from Laken's story. If this story moved you or gave you something to think about, please hit that subscribe button and join me for more true crime stories that don't just recount the facts, but ask the deeper questions.